The most frightening thing about disasters is that they can strike at any moment, anywhere in the world. Such was the case in February of 2023, when a city in Ohio went off the rails. Welcome to Toxic Palestine, a documentary that delves into the aftermath of a catastrophic chemical spill that happened on February 3, 2023 in Palestine, Ohio. The spill sent shockwaves through the community as toxic chemicals leaked into the air and water, endangering the health and well-being of local residents. This disaster has had far-reaching consequences, from the immediate impact on the environment and wildlife to the long-term effects on human health and the local economy. In this documentary, we will investigate the spill's causes, examine its impact on the community, and follow the efforts of those working tirelessly to clean up the contamination and ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. Join us as we explore the complex issues surrounding this disaster and hear from the people fighting to reclaim their community and rebuild their lives after this devastating event. The 2023 Ohio train derailment, also dubbed the East Palestine train derailment, transpired on February 3, 2023 at 8:55 p.m. when 38 cars of a Norfolk Southern freight train hauling hazardous materials derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, United States. Several rail cars burned for more than 2 days. Then emergency teams performed a controlled burn of several rail cars at the recommendation of state administrators, which emitted hydrogen chloride and phosgene into the air. Consequently, citizens within a 1-mile radius were vacated and crisis response commenced from Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania agencies. The derailed train was Norfolk Southern Train 32N, driving from the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis Yard in Madison, Illinois, to Norfolk Southern's Conway Yard in Conway, Pennsylvania on the Fort Wayne line. Aboard the 9,300-long train were a conductor trainee, and an engineer. The train consisted of 141 packed cars and 9 vacant cars. Other reports mention one more car, for a total of 151 cars weighing 18,000 tons. 20 of those cars held hazardous materials, including chloroethene, also known as vinyl chloride, 2-ether hexylacrylate, ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, butyl acrylate, isobutylene, benzene residue, and combustible liquids. The train left Madison on February 1 and suffered at least one mechanical failure before the derailment. Security footage from a business in Salem, Ohio, 20 miles northwest of East Palestine, and a Ring doorbell camera from New Waterford, Ohio, 4 miles northwest of East Palestine, show fire underneath a rail car. After this, at around 8:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 3, 2023, 51 cars derailed on the east side of town, near the border with Pennsylvania. 49 cars ended up in a derailment pile, which caught fire and burned for several days. 11 of the 51 derailed cars were tank cars that dumped 100,000 gallons of hazardous materials. About 48 hours later, the National Transportation Safety Board, also known as the NTSB, released initial findings suggesting that the derailment was caused by a mechanical issue on one of the railcar's trucks, which may be related to reports that an axle was seen throwing sparks around an hour before. The crew received an alarm from a wayside defect sensor momentarily before the derailment, indicating a mechanical concern, and then an emergency brake application was instituted. Nearly 70 emergency agencies from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia mobilized in response. East Palestine Mayor Trent Conway declared a state of emergency. Norfolk Southern personnel were first to respond on February 3rd. On February 4th, they saw water spillage into Leslie Run and Sulphur Run and installed underflow dams and booms to split the floating contaminant. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, began scrutinizing air quality on February 3rd. According to the EPA, humans can smell butyl acrylate at a concentration lower than the screening level exposure limit, The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also known as the NIOSH, demanded an exposure limit for butyl acrylate, a time-weighted average of 10 parts per million or ppm. On February 5th, a temperature change in one of the train cars generated trepidations of an explosion that could distribute shrapnel as the fires continued to burn. Although 5 cars housing vinyl chloride stayed intact after the crash, the relief valve on one of the cars had malfunctioned. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine triggered the Ohio National Guard to help local authorities in what he called a matter of life and death. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro demanded an evacuation in Beaver County areas bordering the area. Officials in both states went door to door to evacuate residents. The blaze from the mishap burned until February 5th. On February 6th, Shapiro and DeWine called for the required evacuation of all residents within a 1-by-2 mile area. To stop further explosions, Norfolk Southern emergency teams performed a controlled release and burn of the 5 tanks of vinyl chloride into the air. Small explosives were used to breach the tank cars, and the vinyl chloride was permitted to pour into a trench where flares ignited it. The burn created black clouds above the site, releasing hydrogen chloride and phosgene into the air. Although officials noted that air quality readings were not distressing, citizens in nearby Trumbull and Mahoning counties reported a chemical odor in their zones. Officials in the Youngstown region urged residents to remain indoors. Air monitoring performed from February 7th to the 8th showed an upsurge of volatile organic compounds, also known as VOCs, in the air below the screening level, and a growth in particulate matter, likely from the soot. On February 8th, state and federal EPA workers detected oily spillage on the soil and notified Norfolk Southern, which began removing it with a vacuum truck. On the evening of February 8th, Norfolk Southern resumed traffic through the town. East Palestine Mayor Trent Conway said he was dissatisfied because the railroad said trains would not run again until all residents could return home. On the morning of February 10th, Amtrak Capital Limited trains resumed passing through East Palestine. The evacuation was lifted on February 9th after the EPA conveyed that the air outside and inside the evacuation zone had returned to average levels. Although toxicants were noticed at the derailment location, they were not seen beyond the site. The Ohio EPA also said that drinking water from various waterways was safe. In a testing report from February 8th, the Ohio EPA showed WKBN-TV that vinyl chloride, some chlorinated organic compounds, benzene, and other VOCs were not found in the water. On February 16th, the Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Michael S. Regan visited the location to help. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources said the chemical spill killed an estimated 3,500 small fish across 7.5 miles of streams as of February 8th. Several captive foxes at Parker Dairy became ill the next weekend, and one died, which its owner attributed to the derailment. Material from the crash was seen in storm drains and found in samples from Leslie Run, Sulphur Run, Little Beaver Creek, North Fork Little Beaver Creek, Bull Creek, and the Ohio River. An oily product was seen seeping into the soil. Emergency response teams are assessing possible effects on aquatic life. On February 23rd, Mary Mertz, director of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, noted that the derailment potentially destroyed more than 43,000 fish, amphibians, crustaceans, and other aquatic animals. State officials said that they have not yet seen deaths or other adverse effects on animals living on the land. Neil Donahue, a chemistry professor at Carnegie Mellon University, voiced unease about the potential production of dioxins while burning vinyl chloride. At the same time, Lynn Goldman, dean of the Milken Institute School of Public Health, stressed more about residual vinyl chloride. Gaseous pollutants disperse quickly in the air, but dioxins are ongoing. The Bristol Panthers girls basketball team forfeited their Ohio High School Athletic Association tournament road game against the East Palestine Bulldogs, citing safety concerns. William M. Deaston, board chair of the Institute of Hazardous Materials Management, advised that burning vinyl chloride was the lesser of two evils from reading from the emergency response guide and safety data sheets. Officials in Michigan voiced disappointment that polluted soil had been disposed of in southeast Michigan without their knowledge. In contrast, officials in Texas likewise acknowledged that they were only officially notified of wastewater disposal from the derailment in Texas via an announcement on Ohio Governor Mike DeWine's website. On February 26, a protest against the imported waste shipments was held in Romulus, Michigan, near one of the two EPA-approved waste disposal sites in Michigan. On February 8, concerned businesses and citizens filed 3 class action lawsuits against Norfolk Southern Railway. One urges the company to pay for the medical screenings and treatments of individuals within a 30-mile radius of the accident. Norfolk Southern Railway offered $1,000 payments to residents to cover costs related to the evacuation. Some locals worried that taking these payouts would limit their capacity to join future legal actions. On February 4, 2023, Norfolk Southern donated $25,000 to the Red Cross to help its efforts in East Palestine. On February 14, the company committed to a $1 million community support fund and free chemical testing of air, water, and soil. On February 16, the support fund was expanded to $2.5 million. On February 21, 2023, the EPA ordered Norfolk Southern to locate and clean contaminated water and soil and to pay for the EPA's cleaning efforts. Commentary after the derailment centered around industry working requirements and safety considerations, such as the lack of modern brake safety regulations, the implementation of precision scheduled railroading, also known as PSR, decreased railway workers per train, and increased train lengths and weight. Critics declared that train companies have failed to invest in train upkeep to avert mishaps, even though they conduct stock buybacks, in which capital that could be used on safety and maintenance measures is allocated to existing shareholders. On February 14, Governor Mike DeWine told reporters that he did not see any issues in the area after the controlled release of chemicals and that President Joe Biden had offered federal aid. Still, DeWine said that no further help was required. A town hall meeting was held on February 15 between citizens and local, state, and federal officials. Norfolk Southern representatives refused to attend due to a perceived physical threat. Some citizens expressed distrust in the government and company. DeWine released a report on February 16 after talking with the White House. He asked for more support from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, also known as the HHS, the Health and Emergency Response Team, or HERT, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC. DeWine also said his office had been notified by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, that it was not qualified for FEMA aid. During a press conference on February 17, he said, although FEMA is synonymous with disaster support, they're most typically involved with disasters where there is tremendous home or property damage, like flooding, tornadoes, or hurricanes. Biden's spokesperson said FEMA was helping the other agencies better suited to this kind of disaster. Health teams from the HHS and the CDC were expected to arrive as early as February 20th. Former President Donald Trump visited East Palestine on February 22nd, giving a speech half a mile from the wreckage. He denounced the federal response to the disaster and proposed relief. Trump provided gallons of bottled Trump spring water for the residents, walked through East Palestine, flanked by Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and his son Donald Trump Jr., and then visited a local McDonald's to buy meals for the first responders. On the evening of February 22nd, Governor DeWine, EPA Administrator Regan, and Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw appeared at CNN Town Hall in East Palestine. Shaw apologized to the community's locals. "I'm terribly sorry for what has happened to your community." He added, "I want you to know that Norfolk Southern is here, and we're going to stay here, and we're going to make this right." In the aftermath of the disaster, Norfolk Southern was blamed for prioritizing $10 billion stock buybacks for shareholders rather than upkeep. Shaw has been charged with evading questions about Norfolk Southern's support for then-President Trump's 2017 overturning of the Obama administration requirement for ECP brakes at Norfolk Southern's, prodding the federal government against a rule that, in most cases, would demand more than one person operating a freight train. Several consumer organizations and unions have expressed anxiety about private ownership of railways and a profit-driven approach, which they claim puts workers and neighborhoods at high risk. The United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, or the UE, also called for public ownership of the U.S. railway systems. The Biden administration and U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg have gotten criticism over their reaction to the derailment. Some lawmakers and locals of East Palestine describe the response as lackluster and delayed. East Palestine's mayor condemned Biden's visit to Ukraine amid the derailment disaster. Buttigieg acquired backlash from right-wing and Republican legislators, as well as from some on the political left. The Biden administration defended their reaction to the derailment, saying they had mobilized a robust, multi-agency effort to support the people of East Palestine, Ohio. Electronically controlled pneumatic, or ECP brakes, may lower stopping distances by up to 60% over traditional railway air brakes. The derailed train was not fitted with ECP brakes, which former Federal Railroad Administration official Stephen Dickmeyer said would have mitigated the accident's severity. The Obama regime proposed safety regulations for trains carrying hazardous materials in 2014. These were weakened by lobbying from the railway industry. In 2017, further lobbying convinced the Trump administration to start a repeal of the regulations ordering the use of such brakes on trains. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also known as PHMSA, said the FAST Act, enacted by the Republican-controlled 114th United States Congress and signed by President Barack Obama, instead directed them to repeal ECP brake directives, after a regulatory impact analysis report stated. The expected costs of ECP brakes are significantly higher than the expected benefit in 2018. The Trump regime finalized a rollback of the demand for electronically controlled brakes on September 2018. The National Transportation Safety Board has recommended this technology for all trains. As of 2023, the Biden administration had not reinstated this ruling, and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg tweeted that this technology may have stopped the derailment. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy explained that the train in this calamity would not have needed to use the ECP braking system, even if the FAST Act was not negated, because the term high-hazard flammable train means a single train transporting 20 or more tank cars loaded with a Class 3 flammable liquid. As it had only 3 such placarded train cars, the derailed train did not satisfy the qualifications of a high-hazard flammable train. The derailment ignited the flow and circulation of fake news, misinformation, and conspiracy theories, some of the most repeatedly regurgitated cases, most of which were severe overstatements of the derailment and the events surrounding it, including these allegations. The train cars had exploded instead of a controlled burn, with crews or police response. Some commentators alleged that concurrently reported high-altitude object circumstances were being overemphasized or even faked as a red herring to divert the public from the derailment or cover it up completely. Conspiracy theorists like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and football player Aaron Rodgers contended that the U.S. government had rigged the high-altitude Chinese spy balloons to distract from the derailment, allegations of American guilt for the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, and the release of Jeffrey Epstein's client list. Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokeswoman Hua Chunying and South China Morning Post columnist Alex Lowe proposed Western media organizations were intentionally overemphasizing high-altitude object reports over the derailment. However, the derailment received constant coverage from news outlets since the initial derailment, though Media Matters for America noted most television news coverage did not cover it in depth and presented it merely as an accident, with little mention of railway industry lobbying or safety regulation concerns. A Wired editorial stated that while social media attention increased coverage on traditional media outlets, it also created a perfect storm for alarmist posts and conspiracy theories. Allegations that police were apprehending journalists trying to report on the incident were also inaccurate. Only one journalist was arrested, News Nation reporter Evan Lambert, on February 8 for disorderly conduct and trespassing. But this was documented live in a room full of spectators. Other reporters made any attempt at a cover-up impractical, and charges against Lambert were dismissed on February 15th, with him freely reporting on the derailment after discharge. The U.S. Press Freedom Tracker and the Committee to Protect Journalists have reported no additional apprehensions beyond Lambert's, nor have they been aware of any press constraints. Slamming the spread of misinformation regarding the derailment, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy advised the public to let the NTSB investigate and stop adding pain to a community that's been through enough, adding that if people desire to help, the NTSB was hiring. Several news reports have drawn parallels between this derailment and the 2020 Paulsboro train derailment, which also concerned the release of vinyl chloride. On November 30th, 2012, a daily freight train running on Comrail Shared Assets Operations, also known as the CSAO, Penns Grove Secondary derailed in Paulsboro, a borough with an industrial and maritime economy in Gloucester County, New Jersey. As a consequence, vinyl chloride from one car circulated into the air. The accident happened when Jefferson Street Bridge, a swing bridge built in 1873 and jointly owned by Comrail and Norfolk Southern over Mantua Creek, failed to work. Witnesses living near the tracks communicated the accident occurred at 2:50 a.m. The team said the derailment happened around 7 a.m. 7 cars of the 84-car train derailed. 4 tanker cars holding vinyl chloride dropped into the creek. 1 tank was breached. Consequently, the tank leaked about 23,000 gallons of gas into the air. Vinyl chloride makes polyvinyl chloride, adhesives, plastics, and other chemicals. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has characterized the chemical as having a sweet and mild odor. Low levels of exposure can cause dizziness and sleepiness. Higher level exposure can drive people to pass out or die. Long-term exposure has been connected to lung, liver, brain, and some blood cancers. A voluntary and limited evacuation site was created. Nearby schools were instructed to take shelter and shut off their buildings. At around 7 p.m., a new evacuation order was issued. An estimated 500 to 700 people within the site's 12-mile radius fled. People were told to pack for 3 days and then carted to the region's hotels. About 70 people were treated at Underwood Memorial Hospital in Woodbury for exposure to the vinyl chloride, of which 60 were hospitalized. Thousands of Paulsboro citizens sued Comrail, the bridge operator over Mantua Creek. In succeeding interviews, residents alleged that Comrail paid them off to stop them from pursuing more money if they developed illnesses later. Equipment damages were evaluated at $451,000. Emergency responses and remediation costs totaled about $30 million. The bridge had an earlier history of trouble. At around 3 a.m. on August 23, 2009, a coal train derailed. However, no cars dropped off. Similarities between the Ohio derailment and the plot of the 2022 film White Noise have been documented. The film features an explosive train accident that creates toxic chemical waste over an Ohio town. It was adapted from the 1985 novel of the same name by Don DeLillo. The central character, Jack Gladney, instructs at an Ohio college. The film was shot in Salem, Ohio, just 20 miles away from Palestine, Cleveland, on the campuses of Akron University and Kent State University and elsewhere around the state. Derailment disasters have happened before, but none were as bad as this latest occurrence. Let's take a look at some others. The St. Michel de Maurienne derailment. The St. Michel de Maurienne derailment of December 12, 1917 was a railway accident involving a troop train hauling at least 1,000 French soldiers on their way home for leave from the Italian front in World War I. A derailment as the train descended the Maurienne Valley on the Culles-Modane Railway caused a destructive collision and ensuing fire in which more than 675 died. It is still France's most lethal rail accident to date. Following the Battle of Caporetto, which transpired from October 24 to November 19, 1917, a British and French expeditionary corps was dispatched to northeast Italy to support the Italian front line. When the Italian front stabilized a month later, General Émile Fayolle, the new commander-in-chief of the French troops helping the Italians, granted leave to soldiers who had once fought on the Western Front to enhance morale in the wake of the 1917 French army mutinies. At the end of November 1917, a rail transportation plan was arranged to ferry the French soldiers from Vicenza, an Italian city, to railway stations in France. On the night of December 12 to the 13th, 1917, military train number 612 returned from Italy filled with French enlistees who had spent a month helping Italian troops. After passing through the Mont-Cenis tunnel, the train arrived at Modane station, where 2 additional cars were connected to the train prior to the trip to Chambéry. From there, they were to disband to join their families throughout France for 15 days of leave surrounding the year-end holidays. The train halted at Modane for 1 hour to permit other trains to depart. Most officers left the train during this stop to take the Modane-Paris Express. The train consisted of 19 coaches of Italian construction, 1 baggage van at each end, 15 cars with bogies, and 2 fixed-axle coaches added at Modane, for a total length of 350 meters and a total weight of 526 tons. By official count, it harbored 982 enlisted men of the 46th and 47th Divisions. The cars were wooden with metal chassis. Due to a lack of locomotives in the region, the local commanding officer for rail traffic decided to pair 2 trains with a combined 19 coaches to a single 460 engine. Of those coaches, only the first 3 had air brakes, and the remaining had only hand or no brakes. The compressed air brakes operated on only the first 3 cars of the train. 7 brakemen, 2 of whom died in the derailment, had been spread throughout the train to set the brakes when signaled to do so by the locomotive whistle. The train may have held more than the official number of soldiers and was overloaded for operation on the steep 3.3% grade between Modane and St. Michel de Maurienne, with too many cars close to the braking power of the single locomotive. Such a train usually would have had 2 engines. However, the second assigned locomotive had been requisitioned for a munitions train by the officer in charge of dispatching. The driver opposed taking the heavy load with a single engine, but was vetoed by the transport officer. The train exited Modane station at 11:15 p.m. and descended into the valley. The driver started the downhill drop as slowly as possible, at 6 miles per hour on the first incline. Still, from Fresny onwards, a short distance from Modane, the train started accelerating to an eventual unmanageable speed of 84 miles per hour as measured by the locomotive's speed indicator. Due to the heavy load, the driver used the brakes to no consequence and quickly lost control of the train. Lacking adequate braking power for the steep descent of 3.3%, the train derailed. The first coach derailed while going at 63 miles per hour. The accepted speed was 25 miles per hour. Its coupler broke only 1,300 meters from St. Michel de Maurienne station after crossing the metal highway bridge at Sorsas over the River Arc. The wooden coaches crashed into one another and quickly caught fire, caused by the overheated brakes and lit candles carried aboard because of defective electric lighting. The fire was also stoked by grenades and other explosives brought by the soldiers returning home without permission. The fire did not burn out until the evening of the following day. The derailment transpired at a point where the railway line passed through a narrow gap in the mountain landscape, leaving little room for heat from the fire to exit. The 2015 Amtrak derailment. On May 12, 2015, an Amtrak Northeast regional train from Washington, D.C., bound for New York City, derailed and wrecked on the Northeast Corridor close to Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood, Pennsylvania. 8 of the 238 passengers and 5 crew on board were killed, and over 200 were injured, with 11 critically so. When it derailed, the train traveled 102 miles per hour in a 50-mile zone of curved tracks. Some of the passengers had to be extricated from the wrecked cars. Many of the passengers and residents helped first responders during the rescue operation. 5 local hospitals treated the injured. The derailment disrupted train service for several days. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the derailment was caused by the train's engineer becoming distracted by other radio transmissions and losing situational awareness, and said that it would have been prevented by positive train control. This computerized speed limiting system was operational elsewhere on the Northeast Corridor, but its activation at the wreck site had been delayed due to regulatory requirements. The track in question was also not equipped with ATC, short for automatic train control, an older and simpler system that had been operational for years on the southbound track of the curve at which the derailment occurred, and that also would have limited the train's speed entering the turn. Shortly after the derailment, Amtrak completed ATC installation on the northbound track. The 2015 wreck was the deadliest on the Northeast Corridor since 1987, when 16 people died in a wreck near Baltimore. Some passengers could walk off the train, while others needed to be rescued with cutting tools. Eventually, a crane was brought to the site to lift the overturned train cars, partly to search for trapped victims. More than 200 passengers were treated at area hospitals, including Temple University Hospital, Area Health, Hahnemann University Hospital, Jefferson University Hospital, and Einstein Medical Center. Most of the injured passengers sustained minor lacerations and contusions, while some also had fractured bones. 11 were critically injured. The engineer survived the wreck with leg injuries, a concussion, and a head wound. 8 passengers died, including one at Temple University Hospital. The train engineer, 32-year-old Brandon Bostian, was arrested and charged with 1 count of causing a catastrophe, 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter, and 230 counts of reckless endangerment. On March 4, 2022, a jury acquitted Bostian on all counts. Former Congressman Patrick Murphy, a passenger on the train, said, "There was a lot of mayhem, a lot of blood, a lot of bleeding. I pulled myself up. The guy who I kind of landed on was okay. The guy next to him was completely passed out, knocked unconscious. People were pretty banged up." He said that after the train derailed, there were loud banging sounds, and the train was shaking. Murphy, who sustained minor injuries in the wreck, helped other passengers leave the train. The man beside Murphy eventually regained consciousness, walked off the train, and helped other passengers. Delaware Senator Tom Carper had been on the same train but arrived at an earlier stop in Wilmington, Delaware. Shefali Culp was among the badly injured passengers. Paul Chun, an Associated Press manager, was also on the train. He said that it started to decelerate before the train derailed, like someone had slammed the brake. Then suddenly, you could see everything starting to shake. You could see people's stuff flying over me. passenger Daniel Wetrin was taken to a nearby school after the wreck. He said, "I walked off as if, I was in a movie. There were people standing around, people with bloody faces, power cables all buckled down as you stepped off the train." Another man took a cell phone video of the wreck's aftermath, in which rescuers tell trapped passengers to crawl to safety while other passengers cry and moan. One Port Richmond resident said the impact felt like a mild earthquake. Another said it sounded like a bomb. 2017 Amtrak derailment. On December 18, 2017, Amtrak Cascades passenger train 501 derailed near DuPont, Washington, United States. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report said that the Regional Transit Authority Sound Transit failed to mitigate a curve at the accident location and inadequately trained the train engineer. The train was making the inaugural run of the Point Defiance Bypass, a new passenger rail route south of Tacoma, Washington, operated by Amtrak in partnership with state and local authorities in Oregon and Washington, on right-of-way owned and operated by Sound Transit. The bypass was intended to reduce congestion and separate passenger and freight traffic. It was designed for faster speeds and shorter travel times, saving 10 minutes from Seattle to Portland compared with the previous route used by the Cascades. The lead locomotive and all 12 cars derailed at 7:33 a.m. local time while approaching a bridge over Interstate 5. The trailing locomotive remained on the rails. Several automobiles on southbound I-5 were crushed, and 3 people on the train died. The train derailed a short distance from where the new route merged with the previous route. Preliminary information from the data recorder showed that, when the incident happened, the train was traveling at 78 miles per hour, nearly 50 miles per hour over the speed limit. The Point Defiance Bypass was built from 2010 to 2017 to replace the BNSF mainline that runs along the Puget Sound coast between the Nisqually River and Tacoma. The $181 million bypass, using an inland route that follows I-5, was built by the Washington State Department of Transportation, also known as the WSDOT, on the right-of-way owned by Sound Transit, the Regional Transit Authority. The Amtrak Cascade service is a joint effort of WSDOT and the Oregon Department of Transportation, with Amtrak as a contracting operator. In the wake of the December 18th derailment, the safety of the bypass was questioned by elected officials. The 2006 Cascades Corridor Plan recommended replacing the curve and overpass where the derailment occurred with a straighter alignment, costing $412 million. The final plans omitted the overpass replacement, with a smaller budget of $180 million granted for the entire project. According to multiple reports, days before the derailment, engineers and conductors warned their supervisors that they did not feel adequately trained on the new route, reporting rushed and totally inadequate training such that they thought dangerously unprepared. There were 5 Amtrak employees, a technician from train manufacturer Talgo, and 77 passengers on board the train at the time of the derailment. 3 passengers were killed, while 57 more passengers and crew members were injured. 8 road vehicles were damaged in the accident. Of the 10 people in them, 8 were hurt. All 3 deceased were in the 7th coach of the train. 10 injured were in serious condition, and 13 had moderate or minor injuries. In total, more than 80 people were injured. Treatment was provided at hospitals including Madigan Army Medical Center at JBLM, Providence St. Peter Hospital in Olympia, St. Anthony Hospital in Gig Harbor, Tacoma General Hospital, Good Samaritan Hospital in Puyallup, and St. Clair Hospital in Lakewood. 3 soldiers from JBLM, including a Madigan Army Medical Center nurse, left their vehicles to give medical assistance to people trapped inside the train cars and help them escape. The 3 passengers killed in the derailment were train enthusiasts, including 2 rail advocacy group All Aboard Washington members. The WSDOT recommended detour routes on the evening of December 18th extended more than 70 miles for the northern route with a travel time of over 90 minutes, or a southern route of 50 miles with a travel time over 2 hours. Under normal conditions, driving 29 miles from Tacoma to Olympia takes about half an hour. Amtrak temporarily suspended service south of Seattle for several hours because of the accident, resuming on the former coast route and the old Tacoma station. Southbound automobile traffic was rerouted away from I-5 by WSDOT until the site was cleared of debris and inspected. On December 18th, JBLM allowed southbound traffic from DuPont to State Route 510 near Lacey. The WSDOT announced on December 21st that it would not resume Amtrak service on the Point Defiance bypass until positive train control was implemented in 2018. The accident caused at least $40 million in damage, including the cost of the train set, damage to vehicles, and damage to the overpass. Sadly, no matter what safety protocols are implemented, accidents like these will continue to happen. That's all the more reason to hold on tightly to those you care for. Tomorrow is never guaranteed, but the present is truly a gift.